It's really an honor to be moderating this panel and facilitating a conversation around some of the most inspiring stories from the ecosystem of independent media in our industry in general. Before I give the floor to the panelists, I'm going to briefly introduce everybody. Aaron, I know Mugisha is an Ugandan investigative journalist and social entrepreneur. He's the founder of Rise for Community and Media Empowerment and Rise Against Poverty, and is the team leader with Rise News Uganda Network, which feeds many on-air and online outlets with emphasis on in-depth, people-centered and impactful journalism. Don Kevin Hapal is head of data and innovation at Rappler Philippines. He started at Rappler as a digital communications specialist. He was introduced to data journalism while writing and researching about social media, disinformation, and propaganda. And he now leads a team of data analysts for Rappler, helping the organizations and its partners craft data-driven brand and content strategies, marketing campaigns, as well as audience development playbooks. Veronika Munk is Director of Innovation and News Markets at the Slovak Denik N. Before, she worked for almost 20 years in the Hungarian media market, and she was the founding editor-in-chief of Hungarian Telex. She has written and edited thousands of articles, hosted podcasts, produced documentary films, and published a successful nonfiction film, and she has ran successful internship campaigns and programs, and Darina Chevchenko, partner and CEO of Genomics Media Consulting, and is founder and CEO of Kyiv Independent in Ukraine. Before I start asking questions, just very quickly, when I was invited to moderate this session, pivoting under pressure, the first idea that came to my mind was an even stronger word than pivoting, and it was existing under pressure. The main reason my own organization, and I think this is applicable to everybody else, the main reason we existed as independent media was really pressure from against us as journalists where we were working. I co-founded Daraj in 2017, and since then it has been one round of pressure after the other, even if the pressure is taking different forms and different shapes. In a lot of ways, one can be thankful to this kind of pressure, because somehow if we survive, it becomes the reason why we're growing, the reason why we're moving forward, becoming better at what we do. But I don't know if hoping for pressure is a good business model. And anyway, we'll talk about that a little bit. Just to let you know, I'm going to have two rounds of questions with the panelists, focusing mostly on the personal part in the first question, more on the institutions, the second one, and I'll leave some room for your questions towards the end. Darina, I want to start with you. Overnight, you had to shift from being a startup, celebrating really the launch of a startup media, and overnight you found yourself becoming the media or the medium covering the Ukraine war. Can you tell us about that?
Well, yeah, it was. I mean, we were founded in crisis. We were founded when the previous Voice of Ukraine and English language media outlet in Ukraine, the Kyiv Post, that was on the market for 20 years, was closed by its owner, and the whole staff was fired. The editorial staff, however, didn't want to comply, and they wanted to do something else. And, you know, there's also like the closure of the Kyiv Post left the market without an English language Voice of Ukraine. So there was no local information coming out of Ukraine, and tensions on the border were already building up. So we were kind of understanding that there's something coming up. We got a lot of emails from local businesses who worked internationally, international businesses working in Ukraine, asking us to do something about it because it's a vacuum. It's kind of crucial for their business and their welfare. I was back then already at Genomics Media Consultancy. I worked at the Post before, so I knew the team, and I kind of asked them if they needed help on the managerial and business side, and they did. So we had to move very quickly out in that crisis because they knew that the owner of the Post wanted to launch something else, and we knew that it would be a Frankenstein kind of media that wouldn't preserve the values we were working for 20 years. So we basically launched in like a couple of days. Within a week, we already had a first newsletter out, a website, and we were on the crowdfunding campaigns. Platforms we were on Patreon and GoFundMe before we even had a website. We did a lot of communication efforts, so we started talking to all the media development organizations in the world, reaching out proactively, telling the story of our kind of the Kyiv post-closure and how we were founded, and we got a lot of media exposure. And that all, I don't mention it just to brag, that all played a vital role in how we actually became the Voice of Ukraine. Because we were founded 3 months before the full-scale invasion. We had nothing, like no money, no office. We were 18 people on the editorial staff and myself. Basically 17 people, 18 in total. And it was a challenge. We knew, like, if not for the war, we would probably grow slowly or slower. But then the idea that the war made us popular is also kind of wrong, because when the invasion started, people started Googling like news from Ukraine, and they found the Kyiv Independent because we did a lot of this communication efforts. We did kind of fight for a lot of exposure. We were on the platform, so we didn't have to set up something hastily, and people just found us on GoFundMe, and it was their way, in a way, to support Ukraine, because our brand wasn't like super prominent back then. It didn't probably happen overnight, but within the next couple of weeks, we did become the Voice of Ukraine, and there was this moment when Ursula von der Leyen quoted us in the European Parliament, and then we were like, that's us, she's talking about us. And we realized that we did become what we were meant to become, probably hoping to become that over the years, but we did become that over a few months.
Back to that from an institutional point of view, but you were very young yourself. Did it feel like you knew what you were doing in the early days?
I mean, I'm not that young, frankly. Like, I have been working in media for almost 15 years now, okay. So I'm like, I just look fine. I'm turning 35 this summer. So before that, I already ran a couple of media organizations, and I co-founded a couple of media development programs and NGOs and media. I was a manager of like a big department at a TV channel. I was an editor, kind of a producer for the investigative media outlet. So I did have experience. But that said, I always did have crisis management experience. So people would kind of hire me to like stop this from dying. And I would do that. I mean, that's a good skill I have. The problem is I had to realize quickly that the Kyiv Independent wasn't dying anymore. It wasn't going to die. The Kyiv Independent had to grow. And I had that realization only a few months into the invasion, when somewhere in May, I mean, the first few months were a blur. We kind of were in denial about what's happening, but it was kind of hard to comprehend. I started working we were very short-handed on the editorial side, so I started working as a news editor, basically. I could barely find it in myself to answer like funding emails or something like that. But then in May, I think I was on a business trip as well, and I woke up and I realized I'm doing everything wrong, that this is a different kind of management situation. They're not dying. I don't have to be that cautious about the projects, that cautious about the initiatives. That's a whole different strategy that I have to take. And then I set up check-ins with everybody on the team, and I'm like, we're changing it. Like, from today, we're doing everything differently. That was my challenge, my personal challenge. I didn't have that experience. I did have a lot of managerial experience, and being a journalist and an editor, I went through a lot of stages in journalism, but that experience of running a media outlet that is growing, that is not restricted because we already crowdfunded by that time. We already crowdfunded $1.5 million on different platforms. For a Ukrainian media outlet, that is something that rarely happens, frankly. It never happened to the Post in 20 years. And I barely know media outlets in Ukraine that it happened to, especially on that short period of time. And we had to preserve that, we had to continue that, but also grow knowing the trust we have from our audience.
I want to go back to that, but then, Don, I want to take it to you. Rappler was sued, Maria Ressa was sued, and it's also under this kind of pressure that Rappler had to pivot away from what it's known to be good at, the journalism. And this is, and this kind of pressure that projects were launched, campaigns were launched, things you were new at. How much of this kind of shifting, how does that play within a newsroom? How does it, how do people inside the newsroom as people also align to this kind of change?
Well, okay, for Raptors case, yeah, definitely we were a lot of us in the newsrooms were uncomfortable at first because a lot of these pivots that we've had to do were shifting away from what we were used to or you know, what we signed up for as journalists, right? Some of the things that we've had to do to survive were borderline going into the space of activism already, but we did kind of already agree as a newsroom that in a situation where democracy is threatened, journalism itself becomes a form of activism. And so, and I think everybody in the newsroom just had that same kind of energy, and we were looking at the same big picture, the same context for the attacks, and why it was necessary for us to do the pivots that we've had to do. So for everybody's context, for example, so Rappler, as you know, we've had all those cases filed against us. We were up against a dictator who wanted to, was doing everything in his power to be able to shut us down, basically. And so it was a very unique situation. We definitely, when we decided that we were gonna keep reporting anyway about the drug war, about the disinformation, that we were gonna get into some trouble with the government. We did expect that kind of danger that we were going into, but none of us expected the degree at which the government was willing to bend the law or to go far, just to be able to 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 shut us down. So we knew also that at that point we had to we really have no choice but to go into to take to really take the response to our communities as well. So we've had to, aside from doubling down on really investigating and making sure people, um, um, so just to be clear though, we never really had to, we didn't, we didn't shift away from journalism. We kept doing journalism. In fact, when we were in crisis, we kept, we doubled down on the investigations, on the drug war, on the disinformation, because part of the crisis response for us was to make sure that people don't lose sight of the bigger picture. Because what the government then wanted us to believe, or wanted the people to believe, was that, this is just one organization. It's not gonna do anything with press freedom or whatsoever. This is that they were just doing their function as regulators, but that wasn't the case. So we had to really double down on the investigations and all those, just to make sure that people don't lose sight of the bigger picture. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure that we were building communities on the ground, for people who cared about institutions like Rappler. So we've had at least, I think we've organized at least 2 coalitions. It's called Hold the Line, and the other one is Facts First PH, and they all really agreed on very universal principles like human rights, defending institutions for democracy, and making sure that facts also the facts has a fighting chance also in the environment. So they're these are things that we were not really we were not initially comfortable doing, but we've had to, because I think it just really forces you to find creative ways to to solve the problem, I think.
Aaron, in the last 6 months, you've been arrested twice and you've been physically attacked 3 times with your equipment broken. And as you said, it's still May. There's still 6 months to go in the year. Because of your work, you told me you lost a restaurant you were running, which for you as a journalist is how you make money, because journalists work I mean, the job of a journalist is the mission, but they need to have another source of income, which is their business. And you saw your business being broken because of the work you do. Still, you decided to be creative around it, and I think your experience is very unique this way because you're blending a lot of work that usually is done, like merging CSO work with journalism, etc. But it's also kind of your innovative way to survive as a journalist and a network of journalists. How does that help you survive in the short term, and you see the growth in the long term for you as an individual?
Thank you very much. I think what we should appreciate is the fact that journalists across the world are facing almost similar challenges. But what should also be tackled is the solution is available based on the different locations of those journalists. In fact, that's why I'm happy that I'm here to be part of this conversation from Uganda. And I thank the CAS Media for Sub-Saharan Africa for supporting me to be here, and of course IPI and other organizations. But we have a lot of cases from Africa that never crossed the international scene. And now what you're asking is because we have put in a lot of effort for our case as Rise News Uganda Network to be able to reach at a certain point. So when I joined journalism about 9 years ago, I realized that there was a gap, especially how the journalists were living. Specifically for my country, journalists are underpaid. They are employed under unclear circumstances, most of them. So the labor policies, a lot of gaps. They have no contracts. So you find a journalist almost struggling to live or to survive. So what I wanted to address was ensuring that we can have a journalist who is not vulnerable. I think we should stop looking at journalists as if they are vulnerable. And that's what we are trying to deal with as Rise News Uganda Network. So what I did, I sat down with my few friends and we started Rise Against Poverty organization, RAP Uganda, in 2016. Our main objectives and goals and targets were to empower the community, but later, in 2018, we realized that we were dealing with non-journalists in the community. So we said, how do we accommodate for our comrades, the journalists? Then that's when we started Rise News Uganda Network. So we said, which activities can we participate in? We have no funders, we have no much money, we are part of the vulnerable, in quotes. Said, what do we do now? So under Rise Against Poverty organization, we started some ventures that could support Rise News Uganda to be running. And that's when I started the restaurant business, multiple snack centers in the city center. Little did I know that my perpetrators were closely monitoring. And because Rise News Uganda Network largely deals in in-depth work and the unreported issues, gender, equality, human rights, climate, corruption, so I found myself as the main target. And by the end of the day, I started fighting with perpetrators who were targeting my side life because of the work we do. And that's how I came to lose my business, because it really escalated. I have worked with different media organizations, but later I chose to cross and stand independently to start that network. So we have been trying to ensure that we can create a situation where journalists are empowered to do their job, but also we open their minds. Like Conrad Adenauer said, we all live under the same sky, but we don't all have the same horizon. So understand where you're from, and then understand the crisis at hand, the challenges that you're operating in, and then see how to separate your personal life as a journalist. You have a family, you know, but you have a duty to serve the communities through journalism. So when you've understood that, it will be able to now, you will be able to come up with one complete setup of a journalist who is not vulnerable. And that's what we are working towards. And I am happy to report that somewhere, somehow, we have achieved.
Well,
Thank you.
we're all looking forward to more good news from about how journalists are surviving and hopefully becoming more empowered. Veronica, being a woman in a leadership position in a landscape that is mostly dominated by men, having to decide on strategy regarding how many investors or not you would have, how you deal with investors, how you deal with time. You've said in many interviews that in a lot of times your job required working over in the weekends, 24/7, which is something you need to do sometimes. But then at some point you have to stop and you have to decide to think about other things. In all the shifts as a person that you've seen over the last decade or so, how did you pivot under pressure?
Yeah, that's true. News media industry where I work in the last more than 20 years actually is a male-dominated industry for sure. I believe not just in Central Europe where I'm coming from and where I work, but all over the world. But I believe that is not the most interesting thing in me, that what is my gender. I like to believe that my other skills regarding my profession are much more interesting. For instance, so there are many challenges, of course, but I don't believe that they are related to gender. Yeah, we are a rarity, being in executive positions in the news media industry and being females, but I'd like to concentrate on other interesting facts like how to build a large organization from scratch when we are under pressure. For instance, what's happened with me, where I still worked in Hungary and I worked for the largest news media organization. It's a digital news organization, and there was this political pressure from pro-governmental forces. They fired the editor-in-chief, and then the whole newsroom, 100 people, decided to quit. And there was this huge need from the society that they knew that this team, our newsroom, can create fact-based quality journalism, because we have been done that for more than 20 years, and then they were protesting, like thousands of people protesting on the street, and it's quite similar, like Dorina said, that we didn't have anything. We just quit our job, 100 of us, and then we saw those thousands of people on the street protesting beside freedom of press, and that we decided, me and my colleagues, that the only mistake that we could done if we do not try to stick together and do not try to launch something new, but we didn't have an office, didn't have investors, didn't have anything. But we did. We launched a large news organization where I worked as the founding editor-in-chief for a couple of years. That's called Telex, and it's still super successful, readers revenue-based and advertisement-based outlet. And also where I work now, Děníken, Slovakia. That's also how we say it, innovative through crisis panel. So both of the countries, Slovakia and Hungary, are in Central Europe, are extremely polarized. There are this huge political pressure from the government towards independent journalism. So building projects from scratch and making them sustainable, that's the real skill that needs to be done, despite the fact that you are a female or a male executive.
Takes me to the next round, and indeed you've worked in two countries that are highly polarized, both ran by populists who consider journalists in a lot of cases enemy of the states. When the prime minister in Slovakia was shot, it was the journalists who were blamed for almost causing something like that. But you were saying how the protests happened when 100 journalists resigned in Hungary, and right now you are saying that it is an audience-supported media that the public still believes amid all the complexities of the ecosystems we function in. The public is still reliable to support independent, strong factual journalism and make it survive. Do you feel very confident about that?
I feel confident because I work for this company that has 72,000 subscribers in a country of 5 million people. So you can do the math of the rate. It's actually a better rate than the New York Times has in the United States. So it is working. I mean, I believe in the readers. I believe that in our industry it's possible to be sustainable from the market because, these countries that I'm affiliated with, both are extremely polarized, despite the fact that being in the EU, the freedom of press situation is not, so to say, the best. But part of the society are keen to consume facts, keen to consume quality journalism, and believe in the core of our profession, which is helping democracy, helping people for free decisions, informing people, and give them enough information for their free decisions in their lives. And they seems to be willing to pay for that service. So I...
But you also worked on diversifying your revenue streams. And if I understood correctly, it's not all audience.
So 60 to 70% of our revenue is coming from digital, not just digital, because we do have print outlet as well. So coming from subscriptions, but you are right. 20% of our revenue is coming from book publishing, which is quite interesting, and we also have some proportion of advertisement, and we get money from live events. So I believe, especially in difficult circumstances, it's super important to differentiate the financial revenue streams. Therefore, the company and the people work in it can be much more resilient. So saying it from the business point of view, we need to be like, mental health is important in terms of resilience, but we are not able to talk about independent journalism without talking about the financial independence, right? So we need to think about what kind of revenue sources can serve our super important democratic function. And this is it seems a successful methodology if you grow as many legs as possible and try to stand on them in a stable way.
If we have time, we have to talk about mental health, trying to do that. Aaron, I want to go back to you because in your experience also you're functioning in an ecosystem that is not friendly for journalism and for journalists or journalism. You were telling me that the new law that was passed recently, the fine for a media that is considered to be promoting homosexuality is almost $500,000. You were also telling me, I understand your model is largely focused on serving communities and inspiring communities, but again, you're working in a space that the community is not monetizable. You figured out a way somehow to use the network and have some leverage over other media players. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
As the Rise News Uganda network, what we are doing is we have a network of media outlets that we serve with radios. So we supply their newsrooms with stories on a daily basis, and they pay for that. So for those that we don't give to the radios, such a kind of stories that are in-depth and sensitive, we upload them on our website. But also, because of the media space in Uganda, which is a bit limited, the largest space is occupied by advertisement and entertainment, which I think it should be dealt with. So what Rise News Uganda network does is that as a source of revenue, those stories that are given to those outlets, they pay monthly. And that's a formal arrangement with them. But also, we also have other sources of revenue outside the network, because Rise News Uganda network is part of a company. You asked about the new law. Recently, we received communication, a warning, because we were doing more stories about how the sexual minorities are being affected, and we were warned. So we sat down and improvised on how best we can approach that problem. So under our network, we have journalists who are employed by other media houses. So what we do is that when we do a story and a media house is not willing to deliver it in its delivered, and we set a target. We say in 1 month or 2 we have to deliver this number of in-depth stories. Yeah, but for the daily stories, simple stories, those ones are given to the media outlets that pay for them. But as a network, our core issue is to deal with the in-depth stories and unreported issues. Yeah.
Explain that when you do a story, if you publish it yourself, it's going to be a few hundred reading it. If it goes on the radio, it's at least 2 million people listening to your same story. Drawing this relationship with the radio stations, how do you make sure that you're on the winning end in this relationship?
That's a very good question, especially due to the fact that we are talking about media innovation. I think we have been made to sort of think that a media house or a journalist cannot control his or her work. You have to control your work, own your work, and control it. You can, in fact, control the avenues where it should be delivered. And that's why I'm saying, as Rise News Uganda network, we serve over 15 million people through online and on air. We have about 30 radios that we serve the different stories on daily basis, stories that never go to our website because they are simple stories. And for those that are sensitive, even when some radio stations are not willing to accommodate them, besides changing the approach, as I've said, we cannot labor much to explain. But before you become part of us, you already know what you're going to deal with. So it's a formal arrangement. If we say we are dealing in this kind of content, you really have little or no room to try and rock us out if it is time for us to deliver. So we are not begging them to deliver stories. No, we have an arrangement with them. And that has enabled us to be able to deliver all kinds of stories that we want, but we ensure professionalism and upholding the principal values.
I'm going to take this to you, Don, because we're all, I think, in the middle of a conversation of how much innovation, especially in the light of how fast AI is moving forward, how much of it, how could we make sure that, as Aaron was saying, the journalists keep owning their stories, keep being empowered by the journalism that they do. How much, in your experience in the newsroom of Rappler, how much innovation could help secure something like that? And in a follow-up, how important is that within an independent media that are usually functioning within scarce resources? How much of a priority is something like that within modern newsrooms?
Yeah. So you mean how much is a
How much to invest on innovation?
and how much on short term?
And I'm going to ask Daria the
Mhm.
same, even from a business point of view, because most of the time journalists are accused of focusing too much on the content creation and the journalism itself, but not as at the business side of the operation. So from an innovation point of view, how much can journalists come up with the tools, the strategies to empower their own ownership of the content that they create?
So okay, just to bring it back to how we were during the crisis years, and I wish I could tell you that during those years we were actively trying to innovate our way out of it. but but to tell you the truth, that wasn't the case. We were in our worst years. We our heads were down. We weren't thinking. Our journalists weren't thinking, and our newsroom wasn't thinking. Um, okay, so, we weren't thinking innovation. We were thinking, how do we get the next payroll? how do we how do we keep our journalists safe? And we were very focused on survival. Because we were dealing with Duterte around the time when the landscape itself was also changing, right? News consumption habits are changing, and um, 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 everything was just really moving. And in fact, I'd argue even without Duterte, we would have had to pivot our business regardless, right? So we so innovation for us honestly it wasn't at the time when the things that have helped us survive for Rappler wasn't really being able to think. It wasn't because we were so good at thinking ahead and thinking about what would be the next big thing is going to be. We were just one. I think I'd attribute our survival more to one, just our persistence and um, just really keeping to what we do best, and still we're just doing journalism at the end of the day, doing the best we can at the situation. And two, we were really just fast to acknowledge crisis, I think. So yeah, in the question of whether or not we we were not actively kind of keeping track of how much time we spend on innovating and just doing journalism. We were just doing what we were going from one problem to another. In fact, if you know Maria, when we were dealing with the crisis, she was just constantly telling us to go Kevin, go throw spaghetti on the wall. And that's what we were doing. We're just throwing a lot of spaghetti on the wall, checking what works and what doesn't, keeping constantly learning, failing fast, and then learning from them. So I don't know. I'm not very sure how kind of, because we were not actively thinking innovation. We were just really at the time thinking survival. So
Think. But do you see the same thing for the future, like in the short term stage now? Do you still feel the same?
well, right now I think things get better. I think for Raptor, some of the things that we've actually accidentally have found during the crisis years, like we've learned, we've now been able to diversify our revenue streams. We've been net positive since 2019, and up until till now. So we've been able to, from just throwing spaghetti on the wall and constantly checking what's gonna work and what's not gonna work. We've finally gotten ourselves back on our feet and being able to look forward. Um, so yeah, so right now we're back to innovating. We've been exploring AI. We've been looking at what we can do with existing technology. We've been looking at what the future of news look like. So finally, we're back on that track. Yeah.
Daria, I'm gonna finish with you, and it's pretty much a follow up to the question I was asking Dawn. Sometimes when we're thinking short term and really struggling with making sure that we have a runway for the coming month, and at the same time you have to work strategically for growth in the medium and long term, and it feels like you're driving at two different speeds. How do you set your priorities? How do you know that, how do you go in parallel on those two lanes?
I'm a big believer in strategy. I think that everybody has to have a strategy, and it's better be wrong than confused in the process. We had a strategy from the very beginning. We created a kind of a roadmap for a year every year. We break it down by OKRs, and we follow the plan as much as we can. But we do throw a lot of spaghetti on the wall as well. But that is a strategy for us. Like, it's a conscious decision. We understand that we can't afford to just sit around and wait for a good chance and be super cautious about launching that product or this product. We launch something, it doesn't work, we close it. We launch something else. It's if we waited for a better chance, or just like, we wouldn't do anything. We didn't have a lot of time, and we didn't have a lot of choice. We had to innovate to grow. That can explain why from a side, especially to many probably local media, it seems like in Ukraine, it seems like we are just lucky to have this rich audience that is willing to pay, because we're also reader revenue based, and 70% of our revenue is readers revenue. At the same time, we have a challenge that nobody else has. That is, we are working with the audiences that, for them, our content is not vital. They turn away every chance they have. And like last night, I was a bit surprised to hear that there was no attention to Palestinian-Israeli conflict, because not from where we stand, our traffic dropped 5 times. And so did our readers' revenue, so did like everything. So, and we are just recovering now. Like, the recovery was like super slow. For us, every time something else happens in the world forgets about Ukraine. And for us, it's money for the media, but also arms about Ukraine. All the other things happening in the world kind of postponed, like the bill supporting Ukraine in the US, that now we don't have even enough ammunition to sustain the front line. And all of that happening, and we as a media have to we can't just sit on the wins before. Something happens, the traffic drops, we lose this revenue stream, so we have to engage the readers again. So we come up with the new ways all the time, trying to rethink it all the time. New products, this product don't work anymore. People don't want human stories. They're tired about, of the torn limbs and dead children in Ukraine. So let's come up with a more fun way to tell that story. and there is just so much we can do to make the war fun. But we are trying. For us, it's a matter of kind of life and death. And, we've been going very different ways, and we've been trying to engage a lot of outside expertise. We made a lot of, and I'm very grateful to our partners across the world. We talk, for example, The Guardian helped us build our membership initially, because after the first spike, it actually dropped. Because initially, people supported the Kyiv Independent as a way to support Ukraine, not the Kyiv Independent. And then they started finding other charities to support in Ukraine, and they just started churning, and we couldn't have that. So we started talking to everyone who could tell us what to do. And The Guardian, we still have that partnerships. We're talking on different levels, but they did help us initially a lot to sustain the membership growth. And then we started talking to different businesses. We have Chartbit for free still, because they wanted to help us pivot under pressure, and we do appreciate that. Based on that, we really managed to build the audience management system that is and the data management system that is very innovative for a 2-year-old organization. And we made, for example, we have Beyond Words, so every story has an audio version, and they helped us adapt it, and we came up with that. We did a lot of these things through partnerships, through talking to people, through asking for advice, and through throwing a lot of spaghetti on the wall, frankly.
And you opened 15 different angles we could talk about for a very long time. But I think we all agree spaghetti is very important to our industry. I want to open the floor to questions.
I've been Maya from Serbia. I've been listening to what you're talking about, how to gain revenue. So if all the revenue stops, how long would Kyiv Independent be operational for? Closing the key for the funds?
Well, we have a pretty diversified business model. Like the majority comes from readers' revenue, but we also syndicate content. We sell advertising. It's still a small portion, but we're working on it. We also into book publishing somewhat, so we do have some other revenue streams. It's unlikely it just stops, but the Kyiv Independent will last without any money coming in for about 2.5 or 3 years. Wow. That's great. Thank you.
Hi, Esma from the Guardian Foundation. I think I've heard very clearly the kind of tension between being strategic versus being reactive. And so I guess this question is to the full panel. Reflecting back on the crises you've all been navigating through, are there any things that you would have done differently or advice that you might give to other news organizations who may encounter crises and challenges in the future?
I would like to say on the advice side and being flexible and being, I mean, when the crisis happens, you need to react. And if you start to think and create a very detailed strategy, you need to have a short-term strategy for instance, how to get money. When I mentioned that whole of our newsrooms walked out from our different newsroom, what we did, we shooted a YouTube video. That was the strategy. And I was on the YouTube video and saying something, you know, that how we provided quality journalism in the last 20 years, please give us money. Of course, it was a much more sophisticated way, but something like that. We posted it on YouTube and Facebook. And we got 1 million euros in a month. So, and that was it. So, I mean, in this case, it was a very, very fast reaction. And then strategy came. So I think what you heard it right, then you need to be strategical, but at the same time, which is sometimes the opposite of sit down and plan everything and create a P&L and a budget and what is the problem and what is the solution. You just need to step up. You need to react. You need to do it. And then you can think for the long run or the shorter, middle term and long run.
You just create a very bad P&L real quick.
I think having a strategy was very important, given like also my personality. If without a strategy, I wouldn't be able to function. But also being very flexible while having the strategy. I mean, the strategy is there to organize, but it's also it can shift when things change very quickly and unexpectedly.
I would say that a strategy is like a route you build on the Google map. Like, say you have to go from here to there, and that's the strategy. That's the route that it shows you, like the arrow, and you have to follow it. Well, but then if you come there and there is a tree across the road, and what are you doing? Like, you're stopping to move or something? No, you're finding a different route. You're just going around it. And that's basically the balance between the strategy and being flexible.
Yeah, but also what matters and what she has to notice that no one wishes to ever experience a crisis. No one really wishes to, but a crisis is like a necessary shock in the system. So it helps you to realize that you have some gaps. When the Rise News Uganda Network participated in the IPR Local Media Accelerator program, the recent one, we realized that we had key areas to deal with. So a crisis, in fact, you might not even need to wait for a crisis. Sometimes you have to sit and imagine, do you think I am lacking something? Not waiting for a crisis, but when it hits, it helps you to understand that you have some key things to realign. And then when you do that, you sort of strategize. If you have faced a crisis and you're through the crisis, like during COVID-19, as Rise News Uganda Network, we didn't close. We were still young, but we didn't close. And we realized that we had untapped potential in the freelance journalists who had lost work, and some of the employed journalists who had also lost work because of their unclear employment situations, lack of contracts, and then we had to utilize them. So we stayed with them even after COVID-19. So that was a crisis at hand, but we utilized it. We got fruits out of it. So don't look at the crisis from a negative perspective. It is also good to understand that it is a necessary shock that will help you to realize the best strategies that you can utilize to be able to progress, because you have to make money. You know, journalism is no longer about serving and then being hit and cameras are being broken. It's money. We should stop seeing vulnerable journalists. I already told you that my target in Uganda is to see happy journalists, to see rich journalists, to see journalists who can be able to afford their life, not being vulnerable. You know, I don't think that one is right. So we are working towards that, and I wish you also join us. Thank you.
Work. I think that the big problem of the media industry in general, that we treat ourselves as this poor people always in need to beg for help and support and explain how important, but yes, business-wise not viable what we do is, which is not true. Journalism can make money, journalism can be profitable and still independent. That is possible. And I think by just repeating that and engaging in this vicious cycle, we ourselves victimize ourselves. And like, unless I'm very much with Aaron there, like, until we see journalists able to afford a decent life and able to say, well, yeah, I'm running a profitable media, I'm working for a profitable media, still independent, we're innovating, we're doing this and that, being proud of just not the mission, but also the process, the everyday work, the conditions of work, the salary, for God's sake. I think until then, the media industry, which is, unfortunately it is now, it is really behind innovation. Like, the stuff we're innovating now, it's been done in other industries like 10 years ago. And let's not kid ourselves, that's innovation in media, that's not innovation in general. So until we close that gap between the mission and the welfare of media companies, we won't be able to innovate on the same level as other industries.
And there are a lot of opportunities. Finally, we have social media, we have digital tools, we have AI. You can sit down and see how to utilize them, put together the resources.
Utilize us, because that's what's happening right now.
Sure, but innovation goes with creativity, and then you have to see how do you benefit from your innovation and creativity, and that is money and well-being.
We can go on, but Veronica, you wanted to add something.
I just wanted to translate it to some kind of call to action to your question that everybody needs to recognize a crisis, and the other thing that we are journalists and everybody should use the best possible skills that we have, and that is storytelling. The best possible marketing is the content itself, and the story lying behind our successes, individual successes, and everybody needs to turn it as a business asset to be able to communicate why is it a good story, as Darina just said, and not just bragging about how difficult it is for us.
I'm sorry, but we have to close. I'm being told, please, more questions, I think, outside of this room, because we need to vacate. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you for the panelists.